Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our State of the Program series here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I've got Mike Koomar with me. And Mike, as the viewers can see, it's Kansas. One of the Blue Bloods, we have got Darren Peterson, number 22, on the thumbnail. Um, the way that we have laid these out is, season recap, state of the program, outlook going forward. Obviously, we're recording plenty of these in advance, so in terms of next year's roster, we're not going to do a lot of guessing because chances are it's a whole lot different when the season actually starts next year. But Mike, this was an incredibly interesting year from Kansas. 24-11 overall. They were 12-6 in the Big 12. They got a protected seed, but there was a whole lot of distractions this year. Um, how would you summarize this season for Kansas?
Yeah, it would be just so much up and downs for this program. It really felt like a roller coaster at a lot of times. Early on, was Darian Peterson going to play? Was he not going to play? And then when he showed up, what kind of Darian Peterson were you going to get? Sometimes he'd play 22 minutes of really good basketball. I'm talking about the BYU game. And then 18 minutes to go in the game, he's got to go out with an injury, and it's a completely different Kansas team. They got to figure out how to win. Now, they were able to get some really quality wins with him on the bench, but this is clearly a very different program with him in it versus out of it. We also saw Bill Self continue to have some health issues. And so that's called into question whether he was going to return this year or for this next year, or if he was going to retire. It looks like he's going to continue to play or continue to coach at Kansas. But that's just another consideration. And then the other one, Kansas really never competed for the Big 12 title this year. And that's something that lack of consistency is becoming an issue in Lawrence. It's now the fourth straight year that they've failed to reach the Sweet 16 after winning the national championship in 2022. So to some, it kind of feels like Kansas has got lost his luster a little bit. Maybe Bill Self has as well. Obviously, 22-23 was a little bit of a weird year because Kansas was the best team in college basketball before Bill Self had to step away from the program with his health issues. But it's kind of just gone a little downhill since then for Kansas, and not being able to reach the Sweet 16 4 straight years. That's the longest streak that the Jayhawks have had since Bill Self has been the head coach.
I think it's a really odd season looking back at the whole sum of what happened. I think there was a lot of really positive things. I think on one hand, Mike, you can say to Bill Self that this might be one of the most impressive coaching jobs that he's done at Kansas in terms of the talent, in terms of where his team was in the past few years. Um, but I just felt like there was another step that they could have taken. I think, they probably get to the Sweet 16 with a better draw. They played St. John's in the round of 32 as a four seed. Like St. John's was a top
The
10
best
team.
five seed we've seen in decades.
Yeah, and in terms of the recency, not in the whole sum of the parts, they probably should have been better than a five seed. And even like with the recency stuff, I think St. John's was favored in that game. Like that was just a really unfortunate draw for Kansas. So they leave with a first weekend exit, and it appears that way that they haven't made up much ground over the past few seasons. The streak continues, like you said, but I do feel like this team was better than the last few years. I thought the Peterson situation was very odd. I think Bill Self dealt with it the best he could. You had Peterson, who, for whatever reason, and there's a lot of stuff out there, but he wasn't confident that he was going to be able to play the whole game. Certain times when he was on the floor, he was electric, averaged over 20 points in 29 minutes a game. They were with him, they were good. They were without him, they were still kind of good. And they picked up some big wins without him. Um, and he did play a lot down the stretch. So when it did come down to it, he was on the floor for Kansas. But with all that in mind, like looking at this roster, I do think that like they finished probably about where they should have.
Yeah, but I will say you looked at early on in this season, it kind of looked like this was going to be a really rough year for Kansas. They after that loss at West Virginia, they were 12-5 on the season, 2-2 in conf or 1-2 in conference with losses to Central Florida and West Virginia on the road. It looked like this could kind of unravel, and then everything changes on a big Monday at Fog Allen. And they win 8 straight games to include wins against BYU, Texas Tech, Arizona, and Iowa State. Four really good programs before Richie Saunders has exited BYU. So it did look like all of a sudden it was like, man, Kansas has a chance to do something special. At the end of the day, it is tough to judge Kansas sometimes, especially in a season like this, because at home it's just such an advantage in front of their fans, and you see things completely shift when they go on the road. For example, when they play Iowa State, they won by 21 at home. They went on the road and lost by 18, and that's another really tough place to play. But regardless, Kansas had some fight in them this year, and you got to give them credit there because it really looked like the season was off to a rough start, and then you blink and they haven't lost in 4 weeks, and then kind of tapered off there at the end. Didn't have a very good performance in the Big 12 tournament. Um, but I think expectations were met for the most part by everybody except for the fans in Lawrence, who expect more out of a program than a round of 32 exit.
And in this age of the Big 12, like there were some elite championship caliber teams in the Big 12, like Houston and Arizona, and maybe if you want to call Iowa State that, Texas Tech probably would have been without a huge injury to their best player, but like I don't know if fifth in the Big 12 this year is like all that to be disappointed with. Like there was four probably top 8 teams in the country, and if they were in the 12 to 16 range, like I think that's okay. Like they had obviously a generational talent in Peterson. He wasn't really available all the time. Only played 24 games and off the top of my head probably finished 18 to 20 of those. But
Yeah.
you have
Yeah,
Badunga and
it's
Tiller. You have some young talent. You have some older talent that have come in from the portal and Trey White and Melvin Council. I think Bill Self has had plenty of better teams, and I think there's a chance that he might have got everything out of this team that he could have.
I think that's part of it. Is this was far from his best team. Um, and look, fourth, fifth in the conference is not bad.
Yeah.
It's just not Kansas's standard,
Yep.
right? The program that won, I think, was what 12 straight Big 12 regular season championships, or at least had a share of
Yep.
12 straight. To be down like this is disappointing and kind of shocking for a lot of fans. But I think this also plays into the bigger picture of NIL and how things are completely different now that everybody can pay players large sums of cash. Blue bloods of old are not necessarily the blue bloods of now, just because of the playing field's different. But with that being said, Kansas is going to have a lot of change again coming next year, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how Bill Self can make that pivot from this team to next one because there's not going to be much continuity.
And that's certainly just I think the age that we live in. In terms of their season, Mike, obviously they had a few early losses as the viewers can see here. If you remember that North Carolina game at Chapel Hill very early in the year, they were hanging early. Peterson goes out with foul trouble. They lose control of the game. They lose handily. Duke, they get smoked in the Champions Classic. It ended up being 12, but it was not close. They didn't have Peterson that game. Then they go to Players Era without Peterson, and they beat Notre Dame and Syracuse, but because of the point differential thing, did they get to play in the championship? They did, and they beat Tennessee. So they win the
Yeah,
Players Era without Darren Peterson, and you're like, okay, now he's still not playing through any of these games. Like, are they better without him? I think analytically, like it was very close. I think they were like 1 point per possession better over 100 possessions with him. Um, but they lose to UConn at home, a team that very obviously is near the top of the sport. They ended up being the runners up. Then they have that big win over their rival Missouri. Then they go on the road to NC State and win by 1 in overtime when Melvin Council has a like ties a program record in threes. Like this team actually won a few close games against some good teams here, even though that their record wasn't so great. And then they had that TCU game at home, Mike, where Peterson played the first half and then he came back in with 3 seconds left, got fouled shooting a three, and then hit all the free throws and then didn't play in overtime. So I think they actually weathered the storm pretty well there through the non-conference, which was obviously extremely difficult with, 5 solid tournament teams, 6 tournament teams in there. And then, of course, that was even before the Big 12 run that you talked about. But I think looking back on that, like that stretch definitely could have gone worse for Kansas.
Well, absolutely. And I think some of those wins also aged a lot better, specifically that
Yes,
win against
yes,
Missouri.
yes.
You know,
Missouri, yeah,
when Missouri lost to Kansas by 20 points, we kind of thought, okay, this is expected, especially after we saw them lose by like 40
more.
plus points to Illinois.
Yeah,
Um, but they got into SEC play and they improved dramatically and they were able to get a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament. So that was a lot better win than we expected. NC State also proved to be a really gritty win on the road. NC State was in the first four, didn't make it past then, but that was still proved to be a good win, a quad one win for them. I think people started to really question them after that loss to West Virginia. You know, you could excuse one road loss to UCF, but UCF also people didn't expect this early in the year to be that good.
and
They
they
were picked typically between the 14 and 15 mark in the preseason Big 12. So people did not have high hopes for Central Florida, nor really West Virginia. But both teams proved to be better than expected. I think West Virginia won the crown. UCF made it to the tournament. So those proved to be different, and then they went on the run.
yeah
So look, Big 12 gauntlet is as tough as can be. And then when you throw in that you've got to play UNC, Duke, Tennessee, UConn, I mean, they on top of Missouri, NC State, Syracuse, Notre Dame, they had a stacked out of conference schedule. They didn't have very many cupcake games. I mean, even Princeton at the time when they scheduled it was not a cupcake game. Princeton, historically, a really good program. So you look at that schedule, you don't hate to be where they are going into the conference season. But a couple of early conference slip ups, I think, gave people a lot of concern over the program.
yeah they obviously did very well at home, and they basically built their entire resume at home for the most part, other than the win at Texas Tech. They, I think something really changed in January, Mike, when they were coming off that loss in Morgantown and they throttled Iowa State at home. That was a game that we're like, okay, like the fog is still real. This Kansas team is.
Yeah,
They came into that
an
game,
unbeaten Iowa State team at
yeah,
that too.
and they came in at 11-6, and you're like, oh, if they lose this, they're going to be 11-7 with a loss at home. They said absolutely not. Like that game was over almost immediately, and at that moment, I thought everyone's like, okay, we can take a breath here. Like, look, Kansas is not going to win the national championship, but they're still going to be a good basketball team that's capable
There,
of
yeah,
winning some games in the tournament. But they had a number of great home performances this year. Arizona won. That was another one that Peterson didn't play in. He had cramps during the day, during shoot around, didn't play. They just sort of willed the crowd willed them across the line in that game. They were losing for 90% of it, and
yeah.
a couple shots go down, and you're close, and then you know when Kansas is in a close game, they win at home. So I think that is something that has been a staple of this program through the highs and honestly through the lows, and these past few years have been the lows. It's obviously at a
Yeah.
little bit of a different standard than some of the other programs, but they have at least held on to that during these struggles, and that is why I think it's the number one home court advantage in college basketball, and it might not be that close.
I don't think it's really even close. We did see them slip up a little bit at
Yeah, there
home
was
coming down the stretch this year.
yeah.
And I think that's what gave a lot of more concern to this program is we saw them get on a roll and then kind of out of nowhere they lose by 16 to a not very good Cincinnati team. Absolutely shocking performance there, especially because if I'm not mistaken, they were winning for most of the first half, and it was tight going into the first half, and then Cincinnati steamrolled them in the second.
Yeah, that was a game
Um,
where it felt like Kansas was going to pull away, and they never did. And then, like Cincinnati, a
well,
team that hadn't made shots all year, made a bunch of shots, and
just
all
laid
of
the
a
hammer on
sudden they were up 12 at the end of four. We're like, what? Like, since this
them.
Wes Miller is a lame duck right now, and ultimately that proved to be true. But he did have a little bit of a parting gift for his friends down in Lawrence. But
Yeah.
that was a really
As did
puzzling one.
as did Danny Hurley.
Yes, that was a little bit of a puzzling one, Mike, but they did back it up 2 days later on Big Monday with a win against Houston. And that was like they win by 13, but dominating defensive performance. That was the staple of this team. As I scroll up here, can the viewers see it? Yeah, they can. 64th on offense, ninth in defense. Like this Kansas team was elite defensively, and they just weren't that efficient offensively, even with Darren Peterson, one of the most efficient offensive players in the country. But when this team got after it defensively, they were really hard to beat.
Absolutely. And look, I think that's part of the issue is the inconsistency we saw even at home. They followed up dominant win against Houston on Big Monday. They then go travel to Arizona for back-to-back games. They get crushed at Arizona. That's understandable. But then they get steamrolled by Arizona State, who
That was the game where
they weren't the worst team in the
he got
conference, but
ejected. Bill Self got ejected early on.
Bill, yeah, Self got ejected in that game. They were already losing at that point, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
yes, yeah,
Um, and then they follow that up with a couple of wins, including a tight win against TCU at home, a game that, or maybe that was the Big 12 tournament. That may have been the Big 12 tournament.
yeah.
But regardless, it was just a whole lot of up and downs coming down the stretch in the season after they looked so good for 4 weeks, winning everything. So just really up and down. And part of this is it's just the Big 12.
Yeah.
There's so much up and down in this. You could say the same with Houston. We could say the same with BYU and Texas Tech and TCU even. But Kansas certainly no stranger to the highs and lows this year.
And during that stretch, Mike, obviously you can't see it, but I've got the Torvik page up here. Defensively, they were elite during that winning stretch, and then offensively, they were not great down the stretch. They had three um, games where they scored less than zero point 0.9 points per possession. It's obviously a little bit skewed with the 1.33 against Kansas State at home on I'm assuming that was senior day. But you scored 0.79 points per possession against Houston, and then you don't get to 1 point per possession against either team that you play in the NCAA tournament. Now, of course, some of these defenses are elite, but those are some bad numbers. Like
Yeah, very bad numbers.
they won by 8 against Cal Baptist. If you remember, that game was not particularly close, and then all of a sudden it was really close down the stretch, and their defense was great in that game, or they probably would have got upset. And then they were worse offensively against St. John's, and not as good defensively. So, defensively, I think this team is and Bill Self clearly figured something out, and whether that's him or Jock Vaughn or one of the other people on staff, defensively they were better than most Bill Self teams have been, but offensively it seemed to let them down when they needed it the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you talk about that Cal Baptist game. Kansas only scored 4 points in the last 8.5 minutes of that game. And just I think one of those was a field goal. And Cal Baptist got within 6 points. They had a real chance
Yeah.
with 2 minutes to go in this one. And thankfully for Kansas, they were able to make a couple free throws and get out of that one. But we also saw that offensive struggle against St. John's. St. John's really took it to them. Kansas, give them credit. They fought.
Yeah.
They fought hard and they got back into this one and they had a chance to win this game. But then kind of a crazy chain of events for St. John's in the last couple seconds of that game to get a layup to win the game. But that one was a little bit unfortunate for Kansas. That offensive production clearly showed that they were lacking something coming down the stretch.
So the season is over, Mike, and everybody wonders about Bill Self's um, if like is he going to be back? And I feel like we've done this multiple times over the past few years, but this one
Yeah.
felt like the first time where it might actually happen.
Yeah.
And he sat on it for a little bit, and then it was leaked that he was coming back, and then he said, "No, no, no, I'm still thinking about it." And then ultimately, a few days later, he did announce that he's returning next year. But obviously, we're speculating here, but it feels like this upcoming year might be Bill Self's last dance.
Yeah, it certainly could be. I think a lot of it depends on the product we see on the court. Look, if they have another season like they did this past year where they're inconsistent, they find a way to get a 4 seed and they lose in the round of 32. Yeah, I don't think Bill Self is coming back. 5 straight years of doing that at Kansas doesn't really get you anywhere. You can call it him being a victim of success, but at the end of the day, this program that he built is supposed to be better than that. So I would not be surprised if this is his final season if results continue as they have been historically. Well, if you look at how good Kansas was under Bill Self, they didn't finish worse than second place, or with the exception of 1 year, they didn't finish worse than second place in the conference until 2023, the 23-24
They're
season,
still
and
good
they
that
hadn't
year
finished.
if I remember correctly.
They fell apart a little bit because of some injuries.
Yeah.
But aside from that, they haven't been second or better since that season. Fifth that year, sixth a year ago, and then T3 this year in the conference. So um, there is a definitely a yearning for a Final Four run and getting back to what they were in the peak of the Bill Self years.
And there is a certain Big 12 coach, Mike, that previously had a Big 12 non compete that is not in his
Not
contract
anymore.
anymore after nearly going to North Carolina. So if you have a guess about who the next Kansas coach will be, you probably don't have to go much further than the state of Arizona. Um, Potentially a video next year about that. But the state of the program, Mike, Kansas is obviously very well funded. Number one home court advantage, according to us and many others, I'm sure. Um, I don't know if they're at the top of spending, but they're definitely in the top 15, top 12.
They're up there.
Um,
Yeah.
and they've got the name. They play in the Champions Classic. They play in all these
Mhm.
great non conference events. They play in the Big 12. Um, I think that the state of the program is probably as healthy as it can be right now for them. They're going to be able to get good players in there. Spoiler alert: it's going to look the roster's going to look a little different than it did this year. They're not going to have many returning players, if any. Um, but I still think Kansas is set up for success, even though the model is less favorable to them in today's market.
Yeah, look, I don't expect a hot start to Kansas' season next year. They're going to have to likely replace all five starters. Four of them have either declared for the draft or have transferred already, with Melvin Council being the one that we don't know about yet. He's trying to get a waiver for a sixth year of eligibility. We'll see if that ends up happening. But you even look at their bench and Elmarco Jackson, he's not coming back. I don't think Miyabi is either. So they're
Rosario
going
is
to
the
have to
only
have.
one.
Yeah, yeah. So McDowell also gone. So they have a completely empty roster. Now they've got some really good recruits coming in. They've got uh, Talon Kinney coming in, an Atlanta, Georgia product. He's 13th nationally, 5 star, going to be a McDonald's All American. Davion Atkins as well as a good 4 star. Trent Perry, a 4 star as well, and Luke Barnett also a 4 star. So they've got some good talent coming in. But they're going to need to have a lot more veteran experience on this team. Getting Melvin Council back would be huge for this program to have some sort of veteran experience because you looked at the last couple of years, the teams that had to replace their entire roster, they didn't compete for anything, right? Because you need to have a little bit of continuity on your team coming back to maintain that level of that power and dominance. So I'm a little more bearish on Kansas for that main reason that they might not have anybody back really from this past season. They've still got going to get the recruits. They're still going to have plenty of talent they're going to be able to get from the transfer portal, but Badunga being gone is really big for them. He'll be going to Louisville next year, so
Tiller
a lot of
is in the
change in this
portal
program.
also. I'm a little bit
Yeah,
shocked by one, and who knows? Maybe he's considering a return, but I would think at this point, Mike, I would think there's a chance that we see some freshmen starting next year. Definitely Kinney, I think.
yeah,
Even if Council comes back, and then Adkins, I think has got a shot too, and I think the other two are going to be coming off the bench. But look, they have four, they have four top 80 recruits. Like that part of it is not any different. They're not going to
yeah.
have to get 9 transfers like some of these other teams. They're probably going to get five maybe, and four freshmen, and then Rosario, maybe Council, and then maybe someone else. But yeah, so the Kansas is going to look a little bit different next year. Not sure how Bill Self is going to attack that. Is he going to get some veterans? Is he going to get some mid major guys? Is he going to get some high major lateral movers? We're not going to find that out for a little bit. Maybe they've made a bunch of splashes by the time this video has come out, but we're not there yet. So Mike, let's end it off with a letter grade for Kansas's 2025 to 2026 season.
I'm going to give it a flat B right now. And the reason I say that is just because expectations in Lawrence, Kansas are to make the Final Four and compete for national championship. They did neither this year. They didn't really compete for a conference championship because they fell apart coming down the stretch. They showed a lot of promise, and Bill Self may have gotten all that he could out of this team, but it's still a B because they did not get to the Sweet 16. They couldn't get to the Final Four.
Yeah, I mean expectations have to matter when you talk about grades, right? Is Nebraska going to get a better grade than Kansas? Probably, even though they made it pretty much the same um, distance. But yeah, I think it's hard to go higher than a B. Um, but I think they sort of like met expectations. So I'm gonna go with a B minus. I think the Peterson thing was sort of not really their fault, not really anybody's
Yeah.
fault. Um, he was given a significant amount of money. Had they split that between two other players, maybe we're talking differently about this season. But look, that's the name of the game now is budget and allocating your resources properly because a lot of teams have a lot of resources. But I think B minus for me for Kansas. So unless you got anything else to add, Mike, I think we'll wrap it up.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning into this episode. Please check out the other ones if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.